He didn't say much, just appeared every morning at 5:30 a.m. sharp, like clockwork. His uniform was simple, almost too simple for the bustling terminal of a major international airport, a faded blue maintenance jumpsuit, scuffed boots that had seen countless winters, and a name tag that read only, Rob. No rank, no title, no indication of his past. He carried a small cleaning kit, a thermos that never left his side, and eyes that always seemed to drift toward one specific aircraft parked in the VIP hangar. A vintage Boeing 707, a relic of aviation history, now preserved as a static display piece. Most staff saw him as just another maintenance worker, keeping the terminal spotless before the day's first flights. But one young flight attendant, Sarah, noticed something different. The way he moved wasn't the hurried shuffle of someone trying to clock in. It was deliberate, measured, almost reverent, especially when he approached the old 707. Every morning, after his rounds through the main terminal, Robert would walk to the hangar. Not to clean it, not to service it, but to sit. He'd place his kit down beside the main landing gear, unfold a small, worn blanket from his bag, and sit cross-legged on the concrete floor. Then, he'd bow his head. He never spoke aloud, but his lips moved silently, forming words only he could hear. Sarah watched from a distance, curious and slightly unnerved by his ritual. She'd seen many strange characters in her time at the airport, but this was different. There was a profound sadness etched into his weathered face, a weight that seemed to pull his shoulders down. And every morning, without fail, his eyes would linger on a small, faded patch sewn onto the inside of his jumpsuit collar, barely visible, but clearly a pilot's wings, worn and threadbare. It wasn't until a particularly foggy morning, when visibility was low and the terminal was unusually quiet, that Sarah finally approached him. She had just finished her pre-flight duties and saw him sitting there, motionless, as if carved from stone. Something compelled her to walk over, to break the silence that seemed to surround him like a shroud. "Excuse me," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. Robert's head snapped up, his eyes alert but not surprised, as if he'd known she was coming. "I'm Sarah. I've seen you here before. Are you, okay?" Robert looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded once. It wasn't a dismissal, but it wasn't an invitation either. Sarah, emboldened by his lack of hostility, sat down a respectful distance away on a nearby crate. "You come here every day," she observed. "To this plane." Another nod. This time, Robert's gaze shifted back to the aircraft, and Sarah followed. Up close, the 707 was impressive, a testament to a golden age of aviation. Its polished aluminum skin reflected the dim hangar lights, and its massive engines, though silent forever, still commanded respect. "It's beautiful," Sarah murmured, more to herself than to Robert. "I've always wondered what it was like to fly one of these." Robert's breathing changed, just slight. A subtle shift, but Sarah noticed. It was as if her words had touched something deep within him. "Why do you come here?" she asked gently. "To sit with it." Robert's fingers traced the edge of his thermos absinthe. For a long time, he said nothing. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant hum of the terminal's ventilation system. Then, in a voice roughened by years and disuse, he spoke. "Because this is where it happened," he said simply. Sarah's brow furrowed. "What happened?" Robert turned his head slightly, looking at her directly for the first time. His eyes were a pale blue, the color of a winter sky, and they held depths of sorrow that made Sarah's chest tight. 55 years ago, he began, his voice gaining strength with each word, this aircraft, N707AA, was making its final approach into New York's JFK Airport. Flight 281. I was the first officer. Sarah's breath caught. She knew that flight number, that day. It was one of the most tragic accidents in aviation history, buried in the annals of time but never truly forgotten by those who studied such things. The plane had gone down in heavy fog, crashing into the harbor just short of the runway. All aboard were lost. "Oh my God," she whispered. You survived." Robert gave a bitter, humorless laugh. "Barely. I was pulled from the water 3 hours later. Hypothermic, broken ribs, internal bleeding. They said it was a miracle I lived." He paused, his eyes distant. "But miracles are relative, aren't they?" Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "Your family, the passengers. 43 souls on board," Robert said, his voice flat now, reciting facts like a litany. 43 lives lost because I couldn't land the damn plane." He looked down at his hands, seeing not the weathered skin of an old man, but the steady hands of a pilot who had failed. "I was supposed to be the best. I was trained for this. But that day, the fog was thicker than we'd ever seen. The instruments failed. I lost spatial awareness. I thought I was higher than I was. I thought I had more time. I was wrong." Sarah reached out instinctively, placing a hand on his arm. Robert, you can't blame yourself. It was an accident. A terrible, tragic accident, but, it was my responsibility, he interrupted, his voice rising slightly before he forced it back under control. 43 people trusted me to get them home safely. I failed them. I failed my wife. I failed my daughter. The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Sarah felt her heart breaking for this man, this stranger who carried such an unbearable weight of guilt. Your wife and daughter were on the flight, she asked softly. Robert nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When he did, his voice was barely above a whisper. Emily, she was a schoolteacher, always said she wanted to see the Statue of Liberty from the air. Sarah, named after you, actually, she was only 8. She'd saved up her allowance for months to buy me a new tie for my birthday. She never got to give it to me. Sarah's own name on the little girl's lips made the tragedy even more personal, more devastating. She could almost picture the scene, a happy family preparing for a trip, a little girl clutching a gift for her father, unaware that it would be their last moments together. I spent months in the hospital, Robert continued. Recovering physically was easy compared to everything else. The inquiries, the investigations, the media circus. They wanted someone to blame. They found me. He looked at Sarah, his eyes haunted. Officially, it was pilot error. Unofficially, it was my fault. And maybe they were right. But you survived, Sarah said. You're here. That has to mean something. Robert looked at her sharply, surprised by the conviction in her voice. Does it? For 55 years, I've wondered if I should have gone down with that plane. If I would have been braver, if I would have been a better man, if I would have stayed with them instead of fighting to survive. No, Sarah said firmly. That's not bravery. That's just more death. Your wife and daughter wouldn't want that. They'd want you to live, to honor their memory. Robert looked at her directly, surprised by her words. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? Sarah challenged gently. I lost my father when I was 12. Car accident. He was on his way home from work. I blamed myself for months because I'd been angry with him that morning, said something mean. I thought if I'd been nicer, maybe he would have stayed home, maybe he would have lived. But he wouldn't have wanted that. He would have wanted me to live my life, to be happy, to remember him with love, not guilt. Robert was quiet for a long time, processing her words. Finally, he spoke. How did you get past it? I didn't, Sarah admitted. Not completely, but I learned to carry it differently. I learned that remembering them, honoring them, that was more important than punishing myself. And I learned that sometimes, the best way to honor someone is to live the life they would have wanted for you. Robert looked back at the 707, his eyes tracing its lines as if seeing it for the first time. I've been coming here every day for 15 years. Since I started working at the airport. I clean the terminal, but really, I just come here. To sit with them. To remember. To apologize, I suppose. Apologize. For surviving. For living. For not being there when they needed me most. Sarah felt a surge of emotion. This man, this broken, guilt-ridden man, had been carrying this pain alone for decades. And every morning, he came to this hangar, to this relic of his past, to commune with the ghosts of his family. There's something else, Robert said quietly, reaching into his jumpsuit pocket. He pulled out a small, faded photograph. This was taken the night before the flight. At the hotel, Emily had packed a picnic for us to have on the plane. Sarah was so excited. She kept asking when we'd see the lights of the city. Sarah took the photograph with reverence. It showed a happy family, a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile, a little girl with pigtails clutching a small wrapped package, and a proud pilot in his uniform, arm around his family. It was a snapshot of perfect normalcy, of love, of a future that was cruelly snatched away. She gave me the tie that morning, Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. Blue silk, said it would bring me luck. I never wore it. I was in too much of a hurry. If I'd just taken an extra minute, put it on. He trailed off, lost in what-ifs that would never be answered. Sarah carefully returned the photograph. She gave it to you because she loved you. That's what matters. Not whether you wore it or not. Robert nodded slowly, but Sarah could see the doubt still lingering in his eyes. Why do you work here? She asked. At the airport, after everything. Robert considered the question. Because this is where I belong. This is where I can be close to them, even if it's just in memory. And maybe helping to keep this place running, keeping travelers safe in their own journeys, maybe that's a way to make up for what happened. A small way, but a way nonetheless. Sarah nodded, understanding. Do you think about flying again? Commercially, I mean. Robert laughed, a sound devoid of humor. After what happened, no airline in their right mind would hire me. Even if they would, I don't think I could. The controls, the instruments, the responsibility, it's all too much. Too many memories. But you still love it, Sarah observed. Flying, aviation. You haven't lost that. No, Robert admitted. I haven't. Some things you never lose, no matter how much you might want to. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, Robert lost in his memories, Sarah lost in admiration for his quiet strength. Finally, she stood up. I should get back to work, she said. But, I'll be back, tomorrow, and the next day, if you don't mind the company. Robert looked up at her, surprise flickering across his face. You'd want to spend time with an old man like me? Sarah smiled. I'd like to spend time with someone who's carrying a lot of pain and trying to do the right thing despite. That takes courage, Robert. More courage than most people ever have to show. Robert watched her walk away, feeling something he hadn't felt in years, a glimmer of connection, of understanding. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he'd believed. The next morning, Sarah arrived early, bringing 2 cups of coffee. She found Robert in his usual spot, sitting beside the 707. Good morning, she said, offering him a cup. Robert looked up, clearly surprised but not unwelcome. Sarah, you came back. Of course I did. I meant what I said. She sat down beside him. Besides, I wanted to hear more about your flying days. Before the accident, Robert took the coffee gratefully, holding it with both hands. There's not much to tell. I started flying crop dusters in Kansas. Made enough money to put myself through flight school. Got my commercial license, then my instrument rating. American Airlines hired me in '62. I was a first officer for 8 years before I got my captain's check ride. What was your favorite part about flying? Sarah asked. Robert's eyes lit up slightly, the first real spark of life Sarah had seen in the freedom. Up there, above the clouds, everything looks different, smaller. Problems that seem insurmountable on the ground suddenly don't seem so big. And the responsibility, knowing that hundreds of lives depend on your skill, your judgment, your ability to stay calm under pressure. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. And after the accident, did you ever think about going back to flying? Robert was quiet for a long moment. For a long time, I couldn't even look at an airplane without feeling sick. The sound of jet engines, the smell of avgas, it all brought back that night. The fog, the confusion, the impact. I had nightmares for years. What changed? I got old, Robert said with a wry smile. Time dulls the sharpest edges of pain. And I realized that holding on to the guilt, the self-blame, it wasn't honoring Emily and Sarah. It was just keeping me trapped in that moment. Working here, coming to sit with the plane, it's a way of making peace. Of accepting what happened without forgetting. Sarah nodded. That's healthy. That's growth, is it? Robert asked. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just running away from the world, hiding in this hangar with my ghosts. Maybe, Sarah said honestly. But sometimes hiding is necessary. Sometimes you need a safe place to heal before you can face the rest of the world again. Robert looked at her with new respect. You're wiser than your years, Sarah. I've had good teachers, she replied with a smile. My father, my grandmother, and now, apparently, you. Over the following weeks, Sarah made it a point to visit Robert every morning. They would sit together, drink coffee, and talk. Sometimes about aviation, sometimes about their lives, sometimes about nothing at all. Slowly, Robert began to open up more. He told her stories about Emily, how she'd been a terrible cook but insisted on making him breakfast every Sunday, how she'd collect rocks on their walks and give them to him as good luck stone. He told her about Sarah, how she'd loved horses, how she'd wanted to be a veterinarian, how she'd saved her allowance for months to buy him that tie. Sarah, in turn, shared her own stories, about growing up without her father, about her struggles in school, about her decision to become a flight attendant because she loved the idea of travel, of seeing the world from above. You know, Robert said one morning, you remind me of Sarah. Not in looks, exactly, but in spirit. She was curious about everything, always asking questions, always wanting to help. Sarah felt a warm flush of pleasure at the comparison. That means a lot, Robert. As the weeks turned into months, something remarkable happened. Robert began to change. The deep lines of sorrow on his face began to soften. He laughed more, genuinely laughed, at Sarah's stories. He started to take better care of himself, his jumpsuit was cleaner, his hair was trimmed, he even shaved regularly. The other airport staff began to notice the change too. Hey, Robert, one of the baggage handlers called out one day. You look different lately. Happier, maybe. Robert looked at him, genuinely surprised. Do I? Yeah. You used to look like you were carrying the weight of the world. Now you just look like you're carrying a backpack. Robert chuckled, a real chuckle. Maybe I am. Word of Robert's transformation spread quietly through the terminal. The staff who had barely noticed him before now greeted him warmly. The security guards would wave as he passed. The gate agents would ask about his day. But the biggest change came when Sarah suggested something that made Robert's blood run cold. There's going to be a ceremony next month, she told him one morning. The 55th anniversary of Flight 281. The airport authority is putting up a memorial plaque. They want to honor the victims and the survivors. Will you consider being there, to represent the crew? Robert's coffee cup rattled slightly in its saucer. I don't think that's a good idea. Why not? Because I don't deserve to be honored, Robert said firmly. I was the one who crashed the plane. I was the one who failed. Robert, you were the one who survived. You were the one who lived to tell the story, to learn from it, to help make aviation safe. Your survival is part of the legacy too. Robert shook his head. I can't. I just can't. Sarah could see the walls going back up, the progress they'd made over the months starting to crumble. She had to try a different approach. What if you didn't go as the representative of the crew, she suggested. What if you went as the representative of Emily and Sarah, as their voice, as someone who loves them enough to keep their memory alive? Robert's breath hitched. I don't know if I'm strong enough for that. You are, Sarah said with conviction. You've been strong enough to carry this pain for 55 years. You've been strong enough to come here every day, to remember them, to honor them. You've been strong enough to let me in, to let me help you start to heal. You're stronger than you think, Rob. Robert looked at the photograph in his pocket, then at Sarah, then at the 707. For a long moment, he said nothing. Finally, he spoke. Will you come with me? Of course, Sarah said without hesitation. I wouldn't miss it. The day of the ceremony arrived, gray and overcast, much like the day of the crash. Sarah couldn't help but notice. The memorial service was held in the main terminal, near the departure boards where Flight 281 had once been listed. A simple bronze plaque was unveiled, listing the names of all 43 souls lost. Family members of some of the victims were there, older now, their own hair gray or gone entirely. They spoke of their loved ones with tears and laughter, with stories of lives cut short but never forgotten. Robert stood at the back of the crowd, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Sarah stood beside him, a steadying presence. You don't have to do this, she whispered. No, Robert said. I do, for them. When it was time for the survivors to speak, a young airport authority official stepped forward. We'd like to recognize Robert Hayes, the first officer of Flight 281, who survived the crash and has dedicated his life to aviation safety. Robert's name echoed through the terminal. He felt dozens of eyes turn toward him, felt the weight of judgment, of curiosity, of pity. His legs threatened to give out, but Sarah's hand on his arm kept him upright. Mr. Hayes, the official prompted gently. Robert took a shaky step forward, then another, until he was standing at the podium. The microphone loomed before him like an instrument of torture. He looked out at the crowd, seeing not faces but the ghosts of his past, Emily, Sarah, the other passengers, the crew members who had trusted him with their lives. My name is Robert Hayes, he began, his voice barely carrying over the sound system. He cleared his throat and tried again, louder this time. My name is Robert Hayes, and 55 years ago, I was the first officer on American Airlines Flight 281. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some people shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned forward, eager to hear from the man who had lived through one of aviation's darkest moments. I won't stand here and make excuses, Robert continued. I won't try to explain away what happened or shift blame. I made a mistake, a catastrophic mistake that cost 43 lives. I have lived with that mistake every day since. He paused, gathering his strength. But I'm not here today to talk about my failure. I'm here to talk about the people I failed. About Emily Morrison, a dedicated teacher who spent her weekends volunteering at the local animal shelter. About Sarah Hayes, an 8-year-old girl who dreamed of becoming a veterinarian and who collected rocks for her father because she thought they were beautiful. His voice cracked, but he pushed through. These were not just names on a list. They were people. They had dreams, hopes, families who loved them. They trusted me to get them home safely, and I failed them. Robert reached into his pocket and pulled out the photograph, holding it up for the crowd to see. This is a picture of my family the night before the crash. Look at them. Look at how happy they are. That happiness was real. That love was real. And that loss is still real, 55 years later. He looked directly at the family members in the audience. To the families here today, to those watching at home, I am deeply, profoundly sorry. I am sorry for your loss. I am sorry for the pain I caused. I am sorry that I survived when your loved ones did not. Tears were flowing freely now, not just from Robert, but from many in the audience. A woman in the front row, perhaps the daughter or granddaughter of one of the victims, was openly weeping. But I'm also here, Robert said, his voice growing stronger, to talk about what happened after. About how we, as an industry, learned from this tragedy. About how new safety protocols were implemented, how pilot training was enhanced, how technology was improved. About how 43 lives lost led to thousands of lives saved. He looked down at the plaque, reading the names etched in bronze. Emily and Sarah, and all of you, you didn't die in vain. Your memory lives on in every safe landing, in every successful flight, in every pilot who takes extra care, who double-checks their instruments, who never takes their responsibility lightly. Robert placed the photograph gently on the podium. I have spent 55 years asking myself if I should have died with the plane. Today, for the first time, I think I know the answer. No. I survived because I was meant to carry their memory forward. I survived because I was meant to make sure that their deaths matter. He looked out at the crowd one last time. To Emily, to Sarah, to all 43 souls lost on Flight 281, you are not forgotten. You are not just a footnote in aviation history. You are loved, you are remembered, and you are honored. Every day, in every airport, by every pilot who takes to the skies with the knowledge that their passengers trust them with their lives. Robert stepped back from the podium, his legs shaking. Sarah was immediately at his side, supporting him. That was beautiful, she whispered. Robert could only nod, too overwhelmed to speak. After the ceremony, several people approached Robert. Some wanted to shake his hand, others wanted to hug him. A few family members thanked him for his words, for keeping their loved ones' memories alive. An elderly man, perhaps in his 70s, approached with tears in his eyes. Mr. Hayes, he said, his voice thick with emotion. My father was on that flight. He was coming home from a business trip. My mother never got over it. She passed away 5 years ago, still waiting for him to come home. Thank you for remembering him, for giving us all some peace. Robert could only nod, unable to form words around the lump in his throat. As the day wore on and the crowds dispersed, Robert found himself back in the hangar with Sarah, sitting beside the 707 as they had done so many times before. But something was different now. The weight on his shoulders felt lighter. Do you feel different? Sarah asked. Robert considered the question. Yes. Lighter, somehow. Like I've been carrying something for so long I forgot what it felt like to put it down. What was it? The guilt, Robert said simply. The shame, the feeling that I didn't deserve to live. Maybe I still don't, but maybe I deserve to try. Sarah smiled. I think you do. I think Emily and Sarah would want you to be happy. Robert looked at the photograph in his hand. I think you might be right. Over the following weeks, Robert continued his morning visits to the hangar, but now they felt different. Less like a penance, more like a conversation with old friends. He still honored Emily and Sarah's memory, but now it was with love instead of guilt. He also started taking better care of himself. He bought new clothes, got a haircut, even started eating regular meals instead of surviving on coffee and vending machine snacks. The other staff at the airport noticed the changes and welcomed them. You look good, Robert, the terminal manager said one day. Like a new man. I feel like one, Robert replied with a genuine smile. Months passed, and Robert's transformation became complete. He started making friends, joining the staff for lunch, even participating in the airport's charity events. He became known not as the haunted survivor of Flight 281, but as Robert, a kind, thoughtful man who had overcome tremendous personal tragedy to find peace and purpose. One day, Sarah approached him with an idea. I've been thinking, she said. You know how you're always talking about aviation safety, about learning from past mistakes. There's a local community college that offers aviation courses. They're always looking for guest speakers, people with real-world experience to share with the students. Robert raised an eyebrow. You want me to teach? I want you to inspire, Sarah corrected. You have a story that needs to be told. Not just about the crash, but about resilience, about finding the strength to move forward after the worst thing imaginable happens. These students need to hear that. They need to know that failure doesn't define you, how you respond to it does. Robert was quiet for a long moment. I don't know if I'm ready for that. When will you be ready? Sarah asked gently. Tomorrow, next year, the day you die. Sometimes the best way to honor the past is to use it to help shape the future. Robert looked at the 707, then at Sarah, then at his own hands, no longer the hands of a broken man, but the hands of someone who had found a way to heal. Okay, he said finally, let's do it. The first time Robert stood in front of a classroom of young aviation students, his hands shook and his voice wavered. But as he began to speak, something remarkable happened. The students listened, really listened. They asked questions, engaged with his story, and most importantly, they understood the lessons he was trying to impart. You know what the hardest part of flying is? Robert asked the class one day. It's not the takeoff, it's not the landing, it's not dealing with bad weather or mechanical failures. The hardest part is remembering that every single person on that plane trusts you with their life. Every single one of them has someone waiting for them at their destination. A spouse, a child, a parent, a friend. Your job isn't just to get them from point A to point B. Your job is to get them home safely to the people who love them. The students nodded, absorbing his words. And when things go wrong, and they will, because we're all human, the most important thing is to learn from it, Robert continued. Don't hide from your mistakes, don't run from them, don't let them define you. Learn from them, grow from them, and use them to make sure the next generation doesn't have to make the same errors. After his first semester teaching, Robert received a letter from one of his students. Dear Mr. Hayes, thank you for sharing your story with our class. I won't lie, it was hard to hear. It made me realize how much responsibility we're taking on when we become pilots. But it also made me realize something else, that mistakes don't have to be the end of the story. They can be the beginning of something better. Your courage in facing your past, in learning from it, and in using it to help others is inspiring. You've shown me that being a pilot isn't just about technical skills, it's about character, about integrity, about never forgetting the trust that passengers place in us. Thank you for your service, not just to American Airlines, but to all of us who are learning to take to the skies. We won't forget the lessons you've taught us. Respectfully yours, Mike Thompson. Robert read the letter 3 times before carefully placing it in his desk drawer alongside the photograph of his family. He looked out the window at the airport tarmac, watching planes taxi to their gates, passengers disembarking to reunite with loved ones. Emily, he whispered. Sarah, look what we've become. Years pass. Robert continued teaching, continued working at the airport, continued visiting the hangar every morning. But now, instead of sitting alone in silence, he often brought students or young pilots with him, sharing the story of Flight 281 not as a tale of failure, but as a lesson in resilience and responsibility. The memorial plaque became a pilgrimage site for aviation students from around the country. They would come to read the names, to learn about the accident, and to understand how it had shaped modern aviation safety protocols. Robert Hayes became a legend in his own right, not for surviving a crash, but for how he had chosen to live afterward. He was invited to speak at conferences, wrote articles for aviation magazines, and even consulted for safety boards. But he never forgot where he had started, never forgot the morning he had met Sarah in the hangar and she had helped him find his way back to the light. One evening, as Robert was preparing to leave the airport for the day, Sarah approached him. She had been promoted to chief flight attendant and was leaving for a training assignment in Europe. I wanted to say goodbye, she said. Robert felt a pang of sadness. Sarah had been a constant presence in his life for the past several years, a reminder of the daughter he had lost and the hope he had found. I'm proud of you, he said. You're going to do great things over there. Will you be okay without me checking up on you every morning? She asked with a smile. Robert chuckled. I think I'll manage. Besides, I have a whole new generation of students to keep me busy. Sarah hugged him tightly. Take care of yourself, Robert. And don't forget to visit Emily and Sarah in the hangar. They'd want to know how you're doing. I will, Robert promised. And Sarah, thank you, for everything, for not giving up on me when I'd given up on myself. Sarah smiled. That's what family does. After Sarah left, Robert continued his routine, but he missed her presence. He realized that in helping him heal, she had become the daughter he had lost, not in replacement, but in continuation. Her strength, her compassion, her determination to see the good in people, these were qualities that Emily and Sarah would have admired. One morning, about a year after Sarah had left for Europe, Robert received a call from the airport authority. Mr. Hayes, the voice on the phone said, we have some news. The FAA has decided to name the new safety protocol training program after you, the Robert Hayes Aviation Safety Initiative. It's going to be implemented in flight schools across the country. Robert was speechless. After a moment, he managed to say, that's incredible. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, the voice replied. Just know that your legacy will live on in every pilot who learns from your experience, in every life that's saved because of the lessons you've taught. That evening, Robert went to the hangar as he did every evening. But instead of sitting alone, he brought a bottle of champagne, the good kind, the kind Emily would have liked. Here's to you, my loves, he said, raising the bottle toward the sky. We did it. We made a difference. We didn't just survive, we thrived. And we helped others do the same. He poured 2 glasses and set one on the ground beside the 707's landing gear. This one's for you. For Emily, for Sarah, for all the dreams that were lost but never forgotten. As he sat there, sipping champagne and watching the sun set over the tarmac, Robert felt a peace he hadn't known was possible. The guilt was still there, a quiet undercurrent, but it no longer defined him. It had become part of his story, part of what had made him stronger, more compassionate, more determined to make a difference. He thought about all the students he had taught, all the pilots he had inspired, all the lives that would be saved because of the lessons learned from Flight 281. Emily and Sarah's deaths had not been in vain. They had become the foundation for something beautiful, something that would continue long after he was gone. You know what? Robert said aloud, surprising himself by speaking to the empty hangar. I think I'm ready to fly again. The words hung in the air, unexpected but not unwelcome. For the first time in 55 years, Robert felt the pull of the sky, the call of the clouds, the longing to be airborne once more. Not as a commercial pilot, that chapter of his life was closed, but perhaps, just perhaps, as a private pilot. Just him, the controls, and the endless expanse of blue sky. A chance to remember the joy of flight without the burden of responsibility for others' lives. The idea took root and grew. Robert researched flight schools that offered refresher courses for lapsed pilots. He looked into the requirements for getting his medical certificate renewed. He even started saving money for a small aircraft. It wasn't about running away from his past or forgetting the lessons he had learned. It was about reclaiming a part of himself that had been lost in the fog all those years ago. It was about finding joy again, freedom again, the simple pleasure of soaring above the earth. Months later, Robert stood on a small airfield outside the city, key in hand, looking at a modest single-engine Cessna. It wasn't a 707, wasn't even close, but it was his. His first solo flight in over 5 decades. He ran his hands over the wing, feeling the familiar texture of aluminum and fabric. The instructor, a young man barely out of his teens, watched nervously. "You sure about this, Mr. Hayes?" he asked. "It's been a long time." Robert smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Longest time of my life, but I'm ready." He climbed into the cockpit, adjusted the seat, ran through the pre-flight checklist with the methodical precision that had made him a good pilot in his youth. The engine roared to life, and Robert felt his heart race with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Taxiing to the runway, he radioed the tower. "Tower, this is N123RH, ready for departure." "Roger, N123RH, runway 27 cleared for takeoff." Robert lined up on the runway, took a deep breath, and advanced the throttle. The Cessna accelerated down the runway, and suddenly, impossibly, it was airborne. For a moment, Robert forgot everything, the crash, the guilt, the years of penance. All he felt was the pure joy of flight, the sensation of leaving the earth behind, of being suspended between sky and ground. He climbed to a comfortable altitude and leveled off, setting the trim and relaxing into the seat. Below him, the world spread out like a map, familiar yet new from this perspective. "Emily," he whispered into the wind. "Sarah, I'm flying again." And for the first time in 55 years, Robert Hayes laughed, a sound of pure joy that echoed across the sky. As he banked the aircraft in a gentle turn, heading back toward the airport, Robert realized that he had finally found his way home. Not to the past, not to the pain, but to a future where the memories of his loved ones could coexist with his own happiness. The plane touched down smoothly on the runway, rolling to a stop with practiced ease. As Robert shut down the engine and climbed out of the cockpit, he felt different, lighter, freer, more alive than he had in decades. The young instructor ran over, concern evident on his face. "How was it, Mr. Hayes? Everything okay?" Robert looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just a student but a future pilot, someone who would carry the lessons of aviation safety forward into the next generation. "It was perfect," Robert said, and meant it. Absolutely perfect. That night, Robert returned to the hangar one last time. He sat beside the 707 as he had done so many times before, but now the ritual felt different. It was no longer about penance or guilt. It was about gratitude, for the love he had lost, for the strength he had found, and for the second chance at life he had been given. "I'm going to be okay," he told the empty hangar. "We're all going to be okay." And for the first time in his life, Robert Hayes truly believed it. The next morning, Robert arrived at the airport as usual, but instead of going to the terminal, he went straight to his classroom. A new group of aviation students was waiting, eager to learn from the legendary pilot who had turned tragedy into triumph. "Good morning, everyone," Robert said, settling behind the podium. "Today, we're going to talk about pilot error. Not to assign blame, but to understand how even the most experienced pilots can make mistakes, and more importantly, how we can learn from those mistakes to make aviation safer for everyone." As he launched into his lecture, Robert felt a sense of purpose that had been missing from his life for decades. He was no longer just surviving, he was truly living, honoring the memory of his family by using his experience to protect others. And somewhere, high above the clouds, Emily and Sarah were flying with him, their laughter carried on the wind, their love a constant presence in his heart. The silent pilot had found his voice, and the world was listening. So now I ask you, have you ever met someone like Robert? A veteran who never bragged, never boasted, just stood quietly, carried history in his hands, and let time forget until someone remembered. Say their name in the comments, share their story, let others know who they were before the silence, because at Hidden Chapters, we believe that the most powerful stories don't shout, they wait. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, subscribe, share, and help us keep these voices alive. We'll see you in the next one. And until then, if you ever see an old man at the range reloading slow, standing alone, watch his stance. You might be standing next to a legend.